Lately, I've been thinking a lot about electives. Electives I want to design. Like, what about YouTube creation? And what about Taylor Swift? And the amazing electives teachers in our community are designing and teaching around the world. So, of course, I'm really excited that today on the podcast, we've got the first show in a new series about creative electives. My hope is that this series will bring you inspiration for new electives you can propose or new units you can teach, modeled on your favorite parts of other people's electives within your current courses. I'll be interviewing teachers about some of their favorite electives, what they are, what they accomplish, and how they do it. On today's show, I'm excited to jump into an interview with Amanda Beal, who is always sharing so many creative ideas in our Lighthouse community. She is going to be sharing a powerful elective for the world today when we are so divided and yet so fearful of talking about the issues that divide us. I'm going to let her reveal the name and nature of this elective in just a moment, so stay tuned. Welcome to the Spark Creativity Teacher Podcast, a podcast for English teachers looking for more. More creativity, more engagement, more joy. And no more scripted curriculum, lesson planning ruts, or boring book lists. I'm Betsy Potash, and I'm honored you're trusting me to help. You're not alone on this creative journey anymore. Well, welcome to the show, Amanda. It is so nice to have you here on the podcast.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here.
So this episode is kicking off a new series all about electives. And it's actually a series that you've partly inspired, Amanda, because you're always bringing such a wonderful energy about the different creative classes that you teach into conversations in the Lighthouse. So I'm super excited to be starting the series with you. And I wanted to just begin by giving you a chance to say hi and introduce yourself and reveal the elective that you're going to be sharing today.
Awesome. Well, what an honor. So I'm Amanda. I live up in northern Minnesota in this kind of really cool rural town and really small school. And this is my seventh year teaching. And right now I have seniors for English, seniors and juniors. And then the elective that I'm going to be talking about is Socratic method. And then given it the tagline, seeking to understand.
Fantastic. So it's especially fun for me because you're located like not so far from where I grew up. We're fellow Minnesotans.
Which is awesome. Very cool.
So let's start with the big picture view of this unique elective. So you've got this
hmm
Socratic seminar elective. You've
hmm
taught it one time, right? You've taught
hmm
it fully through one time. As you
Correct.
set up this elective, like as you prepared to teach it, what were the goals in the back of your mind? How did you hope that this course would influence and change things for your students?
Yeah, I feel really lucky because so this was a class that another English teacher has taught many, many times, and students have always loved it. So it's a little intimidating to take on a
Mm.
well-loved class, right?
Yeah.
But this teacher, he gave me permission. He's like you make it yours, right? There's no standards directly tied to it, so you just do what you want. And so I kind of thought about, what's the heart of the Socratic method, like going back to Socrates. Well, that's the heart of most good teaching.
Yeah.
That's like learning through inquiry rather than just content dumping.
Yeah.
Um, so I try to think like, well, what can I do with that that's going to be valuable to my students and be engaging and be not too cerebral and relevant. Um, and so, and then also like one of my big philosophies myself in teaching is fostering inquiry and curiosity with my students. And so that just felt like, those dovetailed excellently with this class. So the big thing that I noticed that really guided this too is I've been noticing with my own students and in conversations with colleagues, whether in my school or across the country, that students really can struggle to feel curious in the classroom. And they also have this like anxiety about having big discussions. And I feel
Mm.
like that's so much of our world right now is that people struggle to talk to each other, right? Especially when we disagree.
Yeah.
So kind of with all of that bubbling, I'm like, well, how can I make something that's going to be relevant to the kids? And so my goal with the class then was to help students have basically a framework for intellectual discussions, like a way to challenge each other respectfully, while also fostering their curiosity for new and different ideas that may be foreign to them. And then I use like to kind of keep it safe, I guess. I used philosophy to ground all of that. Like that was going to be the lens that we used for all of those discussions and the curiosity and things.
Oh, very cool. I mean, when I think about the skills students need to make change in the world, being able to
Yeah.
talk to each other about big, important things and not being afraid to enter into
Yeah.
those conversations and to be willing to have their own mind changed as well as to change other people's minds, like that is just such a huge gift.
Yeah. I hope so. I hope so. Yeah. I agree.
So let's zoom in a little bit. We've got the big picture of the elective.
Hmm.
Now, if you would be willing to kind of just share, how did you lay it out like on the syllabus? What was your basis of texts or your kind of day-to-day structure?
Yeah. I took, for me, what felt like a really non-traditional method with this class.
My favorite.
Y Thanks, me too. Um, I am not an expert in philosophy, though I feel like I have a pretty good knowledge. Like, it's an interesting topic to me. So what I decided to do is I thought like discussion and participation had to be the primary focus of this class, which is not normally how I run. I mean, a lot of discussion, but not quite like this. So what I did is,
Right.
um, I didn't map it out unit by unit or anything. I might the next time I teach it, but rather I kind of wanted to gauge where my students' interest was and their prior knowledge, which spoiler, they had almost no knowledge of philosophy. It was a mixed elective. I had grades 9 through 12 in it. So what I did is every class, they'd walk in and I'd have a question on the board, like some big ethical or philosophical question on the board that was guiding us for the day and like what we were going to end up covering later in class. And we have these 90-minute periods. So they'd come in and have the question. In their journal, they'd write a philosophical argument to respond to that question. And then that would serve as the basis for our discussion, which would often last 45 to 60 minutes every day, because we have 90-minute classes. And so we'd spend usually 45 minutes in discussion, student led. I just really tried to be there to facilitate things and keep some guardrails on, a little more modeling early on in the semester. And
Mm.
then the second half of class, we explored a specific philosophy. And so, whether that was through readings, which I often just pulled from the internet, or Stanford has really great encyclopedia philosophy. So we use that often, just with a lot of scaffolding because it's a tough text,
Mm.
or videos. Crash Course was actually a huge resource for us, the Crash Course philosophy
Oh,
videos,
yeah.
or activities like hands-on activities were so fun for them to practice and explore with.
That sounds fantastic.
Yeah.
Let's double click for 1 second on
Hmm.
this actual discussion method, the Socratic seminar. Can you give
Yeah.
us like a quick for anybody who has never done a Socratic seminar,
Mm.
what's the strategy?
Yeah, I do this. So I do it a little different than a traditional Socratic seminar, where ideally, in that case, kids would come with questions already prepared about a reading or a
Mm,
text. And it's the same method, right? Like the Socratic method is learning through questioning. And so we were still learning through questioning, but I was trying to get them to practice their on the spot questions. And that's really, really hard for students to do. And so, I might have like one of the early questions we used. I try to keep questions, quote, safe early on. And so we had
mm,
a question on like what makes a what makes a happy life or what makes a good life, something like that. And kids have this inclination that they just want to give their opinions, right? Especially after they write their opinions. So they would
mhm.
want to just bounce around and just reply, and then you say their opinion, then reply to your opinion. And they did a good job building off of each other, but not necessarily like asking those questions. And so, I'd have to pause them and say, well, we're not trying to debate or argue or win or change anybody's mind. We're trying to understand why somebody has the perspective they do. And we're trying to maybe like poke holes kindly and respectfully in someone's argument, or ask for examples to illustrate somebody's argument. And so that was what we really had to focus on was, somebody says, well, I think a good life is financial success, or, finding love, or, anything. So then rather than saying, oh, cool, well, I think this, actually giving like asking the question of, well, wait, well, what if you can't find love, or what if you aren't financially, or, what quite does financial success mean to you, or whatever it is.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
that's so interesting. The way the layering would happen day by day, that they would start to
Mhm.
understand like, okay, this is a surface level discussion. This is
Right.
actually just reading from my notes and then looking over
Exactly.
at my friends so they can read from their notes. Like
Right. Right.
I love that you kind of kept modeling for them how to take it one step deeper. I feel like that is just such an amazing skill for them as students.
Yeah, what was really cool was actually I had a number of students come to me and say, like, "Hey, I'm asking better questions in my other classes." I'm like, "Awesome!" That's like what every teacher wants to hear, right? Like, you're using this in another class,
That is
in their
really
life,
cool.
but yeah.
Yeah. My experience with student led discussion was that it became this incredibly, almost emotionally impactful thing as you would see students start to learn what it meant to really listen and what it meant to really
Yes.
like wonder about what someone else thinks. It's not a
Yes,
skill that's
yes.
necessarily taught. You
Right,
know, it's not a common thing.
right, and what often would happen in these discussions is kids would be the ones, like, I really try to keep my questioning outside of it rather than just poking holes. Like, I didn't guide the direction
Mhm.
in any specific way, but kids would be the ones, they were hungry to talk about heavy topics, and so and we did have to continually, like, we had norms. I should have mentioned that we set up norms at the very beginning of the semester, and I revisited them every single day. I had that slide up before we
Smart.
started discussions, and then when something wasn't working and I did have a private conversation with a student and a mediator about what was going on, that was where I had a turning point of like, oh, we need to reframe this, and I need to make sure the whole class is on board with this particular guardrail, I guess. And then our discussions continue to get even better. But they were hungry for these big topics. And it was just really interesting to see over the course of the semester how good a lot of my students got at, you know, they'd hear they'd hear something from a peer that before would have caused a knee jerk reaction, right? Where they would have just shut that person down or just shut down their own emotions to it or their own thoughts. And instead they'd lean into it and ask, well, why do you think that? Or what, and it was really beautiful to see that, like actually in my other
Mhm.
classes where I do feel like I run pretty good discussions often, there was just something really special happening, which was really cool.
That's yeah, that's amazing. That's
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
you've already kind of answered my next question, but I bet you have another story. I wanted to ask you if there's like one story or one moment that you can recall from the elective where it just really struck you the impact that it was having, the reactions that your students were having, like that moment that you just mentioned, but I
Right.
bet you've got another one, and since I asked
Yeah.
you to come up with one, I wanna give you a chance.
Thank you. Well, can I cheat and actually give like a 2 sentence one and then one that's really cool?
Absolutely.
Is that okay? Okay, thank you.
Absolutely.
Well, one that I just feel like is worth mentioning. So this is an English standard. I think we often teach logical fallacies, but I gave myself permission
Mm,
to dive in more deeply because it was so relevant, right? And
yeah.
parent teacher conferences come up, and I had a parent come in that was pretty unhappy with me, and they're like, "Hey, I gotta talk to you about the Socratic method class." And, and it kinda
Uh.
had ruffled feathers, and so I'm like, "Uh-oh, okay." And they're like, "My kid keeps calling me out on these logical fallacies. I don't know how I feel about that." And then they smiled and laughed, and it was okay. I'm like, and, their kid was with them, and they're laughing too, and I'm
Oh
like,
my
"Great, that
gosh.
is so good because we all use them, so it's important to know when we accidentally do, you know?" Um, and yeah, they were calling each other out with logical fallacies, which was great. So that was one moment. I guess it was longer
That's
than 2 sentences.
fantastic.
um, the other one though that gives me chills actually. My students, so I mentioned, they really drove the discussions, and a theme that kept coming up all semester within our discussions was parenting and the effects of parenting and our childhood experiences. And it's clear
Mm.
that, and I have 2 young kids, so I talk about, my kids and things a lot in stories. I use my own anecdotes when teaching, but they were so curious about this stuff. And so near the end of the semester, we dedicated a few days to learning about parenting philosophies and the common ones and what some of the science says, and well, what feels right to you. And one of those days, like after we had kind of learned some of the base philosophies or the main ones, the follow-up discussion the next day, it just turned into this really beautiful discussion where kids were sharing like their kind of hopes and perspectives for teaching or for parenting, and maybe their fears around what, like repeating cycles and how they were going to hopefully break these cycles, and like which parenting philosophies felt most meaningful. And I just don't think they had ever been really given that opportunity to go in depth thinking about and talking about this stuff in a formal setting like this. And it was really, really cool just to hear, or the kids that didn't want to have kids, in the future, I think they don't like it, just really, really neat discussion about that stuff.
Oh, that's so cool that they would have a place at school to just talk about such a personal life vision that's so
Yeah.
important at our
Yeah.
core, right? I mean,
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah, that's amazing.
Hmm.
Well, I wanted to wrap up
Mhm.
because we've committed to keeping these episodes pretty short so that
Mhm.
teachers will have time to listen on their in their busy days. But I wanted to finish by asking what advice you would give to another teacher who wanted to launch either an elective like this, or if they don't have time for an elective, maybe just a single unit within another course that's inspired by the idea of this elective.
Mhm.
What are some just like golden nuggets, Amanda, not to put the
Oh
pressure
gosh.
on?
Um, yeah, so I would really say that trying to frame the unit or the elective or whatever it is around something that is real world relevant,
Mhm.
something that is just easily transferable and applicable. That's where I get the most buy-in from my kids, where they just feel like they can pick it up and lift it, or that it just so easily could be lifted to other facets of their life or their hobbies or classes. um, and then my other tip is to just check in with the kids often, like if there's any flexibility to letting their interest guide how you plan or structure the unit or the elective. I think that's when it's most successful. So at the very beginning, asking, well, where are your interests within this big, broad, scope? Or, halfway through, like, okay, so what do you really want to know more about? We've covered this, but what are you still really hungry for? And I feel like that's when it's really successful.
Yeah, that's such good advice. I love that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being here. What a delight.
Me too. Thank you.
Thank you so much to Amanda for taking the time to share her course with us, and to you for being here to listen. I hope you're feeling inspired by the many possibilities of Socratic Seminar to help our students learn to listen to each other and understand each other better. I know I am. If you haven't subscribed to the show yet, I hope you'll hit subscribe right now so you don't miss our upcoming elective shows. We'll be diving into so many creative electives over the coming weeks, and I don't want you to miss it. Until next time, take care of yourself and stay creative.